Thank you, JR. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into. And just a reminder, folks, go out there and vote, whether you are here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or whether you are in New Jersey or Georgia or Virginia or Kentucky, where there's Mississippi, the statewide races as well. It is all important. Because our next guest is the Renaissance Man. He is every Tuesday on the Jeff Santos Show. You can find him at the MTC Report. He's online at Twitter. He's at the Daily Kos. He's, of course, Democracy Watch News. He's everywhere. That's why he's the Renaissance Man. He's Mark Taylor-Canfield. Happy Tuesday, Mark. How are you?
Oh, my gosh, Jeff. And he's very busy, too. By the way,
that's sure.
It's sunny in Seattle, but don't tell anyone. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. But, yeah, it's been a really busy time for me in the band, MTC and the Rebel Saints, and also with Democracy Watch News.
By the way, I don't know if that was somebody telling you that, but that is a name that's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. MTC and the Rebel Saints?
Absolutely, yep. We are.
I didn't know that. I don't know if you ever talked to me about that. That is a kick-ass name of a rock band.
Oh, thank you. I just tell people, like, they can't, some people have a hard time remembering all three of my names, Mark Taylor-Canfield, so I just say MTC. And if they can't remember that, I say, just think of it as seas dried up. If the ocean dried up, there would be an empty sea, right? So maybe,
that's a good way of thinking of it.
That's clever. We might call our record label that, Jeff. I'm not sure. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but I also have two books that are almost ready to be published.
Oh,
so that
is
a major project. And one of the books is a novel set in Seattle in 1947. It's a detective novel inspired by my grandfather's generation and the old film noir movies based on those great writers like Raymond Chandler, Mickey Spillane, Dashiell Hammett, and those detective novels. So each major city sort of had its own writer. New York had Mickey Spillane. LA had their own writers. San Francisco. So Seattle needs one. So I guess it's time for that.
Why not?
One more thing.
You have nothing else to do, so write a novel, man.
Yeah.
You are too much, MTC. Well, first of all, is it election day out there, or are you guys?
It is.
Okay. So, you got your city council races. That's right, because we've been talking about Ms. Savat and all that. You got a mayor's race, too, or is that 4 years from now?
No, we've got the 2-year cycle of council races, but so out of the 9 members. And by the way, before I talk about that, I wanted to mention, you just had Melissa Tomlinson on from Badass Teachers.
Yes.
And I just wanted to give you this quote from a very conservative religious school near Seattle in a town called Bothell, where, according to the administrators of that school on their website, the problem with public education is that it, quote, encourages ideological tolerance, multiculturalism, and freedom of choice. So apparently those are
awful
things.
Big problems. Oh, my God, it's so awful. Oh, my God. That means we
got to put a stop to that.
Oh. This is why I have to do this show. Just to understand that there are people out there.
Can't have that multiculturalism.
You can't have. Forget about it. Oh, you can't have people thinking about alternative ways of living. No,
got to stop it.
What a fiasco. Well,
freedom of the press. We can't have freedom of the press. People might actually get original ideas.
My way or the highway. It's going to be a dictatorship. All Donald Trump or nothing. Yeah, it's sad, but it's unfortunately true, but around the country, my friend. I want to ask you, we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the show, about, whether it's Bezos or people like the Koch brothers and the right, the influence of these billionaire types who basically want to I have been, it's a past tense at this point, destroying communities like Seattle. I was talking with my aunt the other day, and she was talking about the expense of Boston, and I said, it's not only Boston. I talked to my buddy Mark in Seattle every Tuesday on the air, and he's telling me about the cost of living, and he's been telling me for years. And I know that this is one of the issues that it is going to be determined as Bezos put a ton of money into the city council races that are going to come out today. What will be the reaction if indeed all the establishment or the people that have been bought off by Bezos wins? What is a scenario if they don't win? Will they come back again and do what they did? What was it, 4 years ago or 2 years ago?
Well, yes, there's a whole slate of challengers and incumbents that are running on progressive tickets. And by the way, we've had long discussions about this at our Democracy Watch News press briefings. And Jeff Bezos, I would call him a libertarian at this point.
Yeah,
Jeff,
exactly.
Socially, he can be liberal on some issues like the immigration issue. He was totally opposed to Trump. But on other issues, he's all for business. He's all for not paying taxes. He's all for, capitalism to the nth degree to where it becomes a monopoly like Amazon. So he wants to take over all these markets. And he actually, surprisingly enough, he lives near Seattle in a rich suburb called Medina, which is the same suburb where George W. Bush went to campaign and ended up leaving a huge budget deficit for the city because of the overtime paid to police and security. But this time, they're also having a budget crisis. They have all these billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates living out there in Medina, but the city can't pay its bills. So on Mr. Bezos' ballot today and Mr. Gates' ballot is a measure to raise property taxes. So we'll see what they do in their own community. But in terms of what he's doing in Seattle, they are literally trying to buy the race. They poured $1.5 million into it in the last week before this election. This is totally unprecedented, Jeff, for Seattle. We've never had this much money thrown into a race at the last moment. They're funneling it through a group called the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce is how that's working. So it's a huge cash flow that hit this part of the country. That's why you have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders out there on the campaign trail talking about it, and Robert Reich, tweeting about it. Washington Post and New York Times is reporting on this because it's literally a crass attempt by a corporation to buy the city council, to literally put in their own, quote, business-friendly, unquote, candidates, which I guess, Jeff, that means they don't like taxes. They don't want any taxes. They don't apparently care too much about affordable housing and the mass homelessness in Seattle and the fact that the middle class and working class is being chased out of town. So these are the kind of people, like former police officer Jim Pugel, that are now in the pockets of Amazon, and they're funding them. And so you have other folks who are on the opposite side who are refusing to accept any money from Amazon whatsoever. So it's a clear demarcation line here, Jeff, between the folks that are pro-corporate, pro sort of this libertarian kind of anything goes attitude, and then those folks who believe in responsible government. And in the case of Shama Sawant, I mean, she is a self-described democratic socialist. So there you go. It's been moving towards a more progressive direction on the city council for years, but there are complaints and backlash from the business community who think that they don't need to pay taxes in order to keep the infrastructure of the city alive, and keep people in homes. So you've got, unfortunately, I talked to some of Adam Lewis's. He's Robert Reich's sort of candidate for the city council here, and that was Robert Reich was his professor at the Columbia. But he says his volunteers say that the turnout as of a couple of days ago was very, very low, and this is a mail-in ballot system. So everyone today has until 8 p.m. to drop their ballots in the drop boxes across the city. It's probably too late to get them postmarked because they would have to be postmarked before tomorrow, which is November 6th. But there's actually been a late-breaking story that the Seattle Times covered, too, about how some folks in the Shama Sawant campaign were asking the county to maybe keep some of the ballots drop boxes open a little later because apparently there are reports that they're filling up now at the last minute. A lot of people are dropping off their ballots, and so people haven't been able to get them into some of the drop boxes because they're just cramming them in there and they're full. And these drop boxes are quite large. They're not, like small. They're like small dumpsters. So apparently there's been a big surge in the turnout today, and that's good news for the progressives because it was those kinds of grassroots campaigns knocking door to door. By the way, you talk about how the Democrats had a hard time in this last national election in 2016 actually getting the grassroots motivated. Well, I've witnessed this firsthand how Adam Lewis, his people have knocked on my door at least 3 times in the last couple of weeks.
Wow.
So they are going door to door multiple times. They have a list. They have an app on their phone that tells them exactly who's already voted and who hasn't. And so they know when they knock on the door whether you voted or not. And so their job is to make sure that whoever you vote for, that everyone votes, because I think the progressive candidates, the challengers, including Sean Scott, who's a really brilliant, up-and-coming black candidate. He's an amazing guy, and he deserves a chance, I think, to get into the power structure of the city and bring us some new progressive energy. That would be really good instead of this business-friendly thing, which is kind of it's another sort of middle-of-the-road, conservative Democrat kind of style of government, which people are pretty tired of at this point.
I was talking to Mark Taylor-Canfield, a Renaissance man here on the Jeff Santos Show, and he's a great musician on top of his great journalism. I want to ask you about something that I saw the other day in Ari Melber on MSNBC. He had on the great Michael Stipe, who, of course, lead singer of R.E.M., and they were talking about the fact that there was another panelist on the program from the world of Hollywood. He's a director. I don't remember his name. He was talking about the idea of making a difference and musicians going out to make a difference. Now, I kind of disagreed with the question, and I want to ask you, who's more engaged in the community of music and so forth. Yes, I would agree with this sense that the folks who are the pop stars, they're not very political. We all know that. I mean, Kanye has done his thing, and on both sides of first with Trump, then not against Trump, and then doing other things. There's of course Taylor Swift, not much. Miss Perry there and others, but I guess there's not the alternative radio stations that there used to be. I know that there's a handful of them left, but how much do you think? Because if there's not a platform for these folks, this is like there's not a lot of progressive talk stations. Talk to me about that, because I think it's important to give the platform to the musician. And radio, is not what it used to be either, and I understand that, but the internet is there. About being more politically active. And I remember you telling me on the Showbox, the great theater that you're trying to save, that Eddie Vedder and others were out there, doing the right thing too. So, give me your thoughts on that, man.
Lady Gaga is out there, so I follow her on Twitter, and she's quite political. So there are some folks out there that are at the street who are doing this. And I think that, here in Seattle, we saw Brandi Carlile, who is a Grammy Award winner, Dave Matthews, both came out for the student event protesting the NRA. So that was great. That's when Jay Inslee said, I'm just going to step aside and let the kids take over because they know what's up. We don't get it.
Smart man.
But it means a lot to me to see local bands. Now, Pearl Jam did two shows consecutively last year to raise money for in homelessness. So it's possible that these bands are political, and they do step up at times. Now, I look at it this way. The bands who play on a regular basis in the clubs, we have great bands here like the Black Tones or Barracks. Black Tones is my friend Eva Walker. She's just incredible, beautiful lead singer and amazing talented vocalist and guitarist. Her and her brother Cedric have that band. They've been getting a lot of national attention. Barracks, which is Shayna Shepherd. She's probably the best singer maybe I've ever heard, and definitely the best singer in Seattle. Her band does a lot of great stuff. There are local artists here who are always willing to step up and do benefits at the Nectar or the Showbox or wherever it needs to be done. Sometimes, I saw the Black Tones one of the first times I saw them. They were playing a basement house party to raise money for a homeless shelter. So there are those musicians, but I think that when the local musicians who actually live in the city and play in the clubs on a regular basis, the people that I work with, they're the ones that really matter, because they're the ones that step up and they get things done, they organize things. So it's better, I think, almost if your local bands in your local community take the lead on all these issues. Now, with the Showbox, there is an update I should share with your audience, because we haven't talked about this. But, the owners filed a lawsuit against the city of Seattle when Seattle tried to rezone it as a historical part of the Pike Place Market districting zone, the landmark preservation zone. Well, the owners sued Seattle, and they had this huge court battle. And at this point, the city of Seattle has just recently now actually settled with the corporation and gave them $915,000. And that's, Pete Holmes, a very progressive, pro-legalization of pot kind of guy who is our city attorney. He was the one who made that settlement and said if we had gone on to court, it would have cost us more. So there's been some worry, some anxiety in the community about what's actually going on at the Showbox. But I'm confident that even though there is an option now for the owners to sell it to a third party, there's so much historic preservation status in the building, even to the second floor of the building, they're going to have a really hard time doing anything with that building but, selling it to somebody who wants to rent it as a music club. So the goal is to have Historic Seattle, which is a nonprofit organization here in Seattle, which owns a lot of property, a lot of artistic landmarks and, cultural heritage sites. They would like to buy the building, and they've made it very clear to the owners and to the city and to all the musicians and everyone involved that if they can raise the $41 million or so in order to get the property, that's what they want to do. So that's the next step. There's been a settlement. The city paid off the owners, and they felt that were going to lose that case, or at least it was going to cost the city a lot of money in court. So, but what it did, Jeff, is it allowed time, the owners, it pulled them into court so that the community had time to get organized and give it landmark preservation status, because the Landmark Preservation Board hearing process takes a while. You can't just do it overnight.
That doesn't happen overnight. Hey, I just got a email from my good friend Peter in Florida, and he asked about anti-war people in music, and I mentioned Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who has talked a lot about the influence of right-wing Israelis on the Middle East and so forth. But as a rule, I'm trying to think. I mean, obviously Springsteen with Born in the USA and anti-Vietnam, even though a lot of right-wing co-opted and thought of it as a patriotic USA all the way kind of thing in the 80s. But when you think of anti-war, there are not a lot. Well, in comparison to the 60s, when Floyd comes from that time period.
Well, yeah, it seemed like all the bands in the 60s and early 70s were anti-war. That was a lot of what the music was about.
Yeah,
Crosby,
exactly.
Stills, Nash and Young.
Buffalo Springfield, yada, yada, yeah.
Covering Joni Mitchell about on their way to Woodstock. And, there were so many songs that were hit songs that were about the war. They were really well done and well-produced songs by really great bands. And these days, it's a much different market, I think. You don't have just Capitol Records and a few others, Warner Brothers and stuff, running the music industry. There's a lot of indie bands, and there's an independent economy going on now that involves a lot of independence. Now, I do protest music, actually. I don't know if I've ever actually played any on your program and your show, but I do often.
Well, the Trump song we played in the past, of course.
Music, that's political in nature, and a lot of the times it's just me and my guitar, so I kind of take the Bob Dylan sort of attitude. There is a song called The Ballad of N30 that we're going to release on YouTube as a music video very soon here to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the WTO demonstrations in Seattle. It is about the World Trade Organization and the protests here in Seattle about that, and just people's attitude about, what happens when an international organization comes into your city and suddenly, it's martial law and they've created a huge no protest zone, So it's a story. It's about, I think we all as musicians have that side of us one way or another. Some musicians are more comfortable expressing it publicly. We talked about Eddie Vedder singing with his ukulele at a Ralph Nader event a few years ago. And I think in Seattle, the bands do tend to be political in one way or another, whether their music is political or not. Their attitude, tends to be pretty DIY and, let's stand for the community. And there is a band here, actually, that just won a trademark battle with the Trade Commission, I guess, Federal Trade Commission, because They're called Thunder Pussy, and apparently the Federal Trade Commission said that was obscene, and they wouldn't give them a trademark. But they won. In a landmark case, the Supreme Court had to say, yeah, okay,
The fact is that you can, I mean, there was a band called Pussy Riot, of course, right?
Right. Exactly. The huge, historic...
So there you go, and Mr. Putin didn't like that.
Russia.
So, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, that band caused a sensation. Yoko Ono was supporting them, like all these Lady Gaga. It was all about female power and also resistance to the Orthodox Russian Church and, Putin's dictatorship and all sorts of things that were going on there. So, yeah, they were threatened with prison time and all sorts of stuff. So it became a human rights issue. And, there's also, 7-Year Bitch, and there's all sorts of names of bands that are not necessarily pleasant or meant to be family friendly, but that's the rock and roll. I mean,
right, exactly.
The point is, if you haven't offended somebody, then this is what somebody told me: is if you haven't offended someone, then you're not doing it. You're not doing rock and roll, right?
You're not doing rock and roll yet. It's just this, blind popness, and we've had enough of that. Thank you very much. Well, Mark, just about 2 minutes left here. One of the things that I think is important, as we have said, all day long here, is to get out there and vote. And I want to ask you this, because I've been asking all of our contributors about this. The idea of having, and I know the cloud cover and the rain, even though Seattle is a great place to live, folks.
Don't tell anyone.
It rains a lot come November.
Always raining here.
Yes,
vampires everywhere.
Exactly. But wouldn't it be easier to have an election in the middle of July or August when it's sunny in Seattle, not in Philadelphia, but in Seattle, and the Bumbershoot Festival is going on and all that? Remember from my days in the 90s when I was there. I think that this is a no-brainer, and I think one of the things, if Sanders becomes the next president of the United States, that I would urge him to look in is to changing how our elections are administered. There's a lot of crooks, as we all know, and hearing Greg Palast and so forth in this, but is they move it to the summertime. Or again, if you want to do it before the kids get out of school, if that's a concern of yours, do it May 15th or 18th or whatever. Or if you want to do it on the way out, September 15th. But I think that to me is a key thing going forward if you want to keep the youth activated. Your thoughts on that before we roll?
Well, I'll answer and give myself a plug at the same time, okay? On YouTube, on the MTC report, I've talked about this issue where we need to have a national holiday on Election Day. Mm-hmm. For working folks, modern culture, 21st century culture is kind of complicated for some people, and it keeps them very busy all day long. So at some point, you do need to follow, I think, more of a European-style model and just say, hey, everybody's got the day off. It's like Labor Day or Memorial Day.
Flag Day, whatever.
Everybody, and go vote.
Whatever. Yeah. Amen. And I think you should allow 16-year-olds to vote, too. We just got that thumbs up from Melissa Tomlinson, who's teaching the 16-year-olds every day. Mark, you got to run, my friend. Always the best. Check him out on Twitter. We'll talk to you next Tuesday. Safe journey tonight when you're out there with the election party going on.
Oh, yeah, I'll be at Andrew Lewis's, I'm sure maybe Shama Sawant's campaign parties to see what happens, to see what the results are, and then we'll have a lot more to report with you next week.
All the best. Take care, Mark Taylor-Canfield. I want to thank our great producer here in studio, JR, for helping produce this broadcast, and, of course, thank Tony Lopes and Mr. Pacheco for allowing us to have this platform. Keep on fighting, folks. Vote, vote, vote. You got till 8 p.m. tonight here in Massachusetts and around the country, too, 7, 8 o'clock. My name is Jeff Santos, and I gotta go.
W259DD 99.7 FM WBBF.
35 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into, and we're going to do a couple of quick interviews this half hour. We're going to talk with our good friend Donna Kelly-Williams coming up in about 10 minutes. But we turn our attention once again to the great city of Seattle. We left last night, our last guest of the night, the great MTC, Mark Taylor-Canfield, about what was happening in the Seattle City Council races. We bring him back to give us a report And I know it was a tough night for Mark, because he's very close to the former City Councilman Savant, who lost by about a little less than 2,000 votes last night. I know there was a lot of stuff going on in that great city. And here he is again, Mark Taylor-Canfield. Mark, a little bit earlier, but great to have you back. How are you, my man?
Well, I think I'm recovered. It was an interesting night. I was at the campaign gathering for Andrew Lewis, and we talked about him on yesterday's program, about him being sort of the Robert Reich, former U.S. Secretary of Labor's candidate here, because Andrew was actually Robert Reich's student at Columbia. So they have great admiration for each other, but it's tied at this point. So we've got, they've both got about 50%. And so I think in the next few, I'm going to do a check while I'm on the call here with you to see if there's any recent updates. But, there's got a lot of votes to be counted. And Andrew was very confident, actually, and maybe this comes from being a newcomer to the political game, and so there's anything is possible at this point is kind of his attitude. So he was feeling really good about the election. And to tell you the truth, I mean, to have somebody who's a young man like Andrew is in his 20s, come along and first time ever, run for city council race and get 50% is amazing. I mean, it's unheard of. So kudos to him, and also he gave a big shout out to a group that really helped him out. It was the local hospitality workers union got together, and so they formed a group called United Here, and he said that they were instrumental in getting the word out about his campaign and organizing, but also he also had support from people that he didn't even know were volunteering for his campaign. So that's a good sign, right, Jeff? When people are actually going door to door for you just on their own behalf because they're so worried about the election. I mean, a lot of people just didn't want to see Amazon bankroll this election and get their quote, business-friendly, unquote, candidates on the council. Right now, it looks like the major loss, a Socialist Party member on the council who is an international figure, but Amazon put a lot of money against her, a great political leader, a great organizer, and, has really taken the city council on and challenged them to be the progressive council that they claim to be, because that has typically been the case in Seattle, that the candidates run on a very progressive platform, and then once they get elected, they just start, and the mayors do this too, they start your corporations like Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft, Starbucks, and then start fighting, issues like this affordable housing tax,
right,
which was passed at one point and then rescinded by our own council members because of the pressure from corporations like Amazon.
Let me ask you, Mark, we're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here a day after the election in Seattle last night. Of course, many other states were making election results last night available. Some are still counting the votes. Talk to me about what you think this means for Amazon. What do you think it means for the connection to Bernie Sanders that Ms. Sawant has? And is the future for Ms. Sawant to, I'm sorry to throw all these questions at you, but is she going to run again, maybe even for higher office?
Well, first of all, anybody can spin the story however they want. I've already seen Fox News claiming that, progressives got beat by Amazon in Seattle. But if you look at the preliminary results, and believe me, these are preliminary, so anything can happen within the next 24 hours. But if you look at the preliminary results, then incumbent progressives who refuse to take Amazon money, like Lisa Herbold, who's also a friend, she is winning at this point. Tammy Morales, another non-Amazon incumbent, winning. There are a couple of people like Sean Scott, who's the young African-American candidate, great guy who really deserves a shot at power in this city, and he is trailing at this point. But Deborah Juarez, who's a non-Amazon candidate, she's winning so far. And then Andrew Lewis and Jim Pugel being the former Seattle police officer are neck and neck. And also, I have to throw this out. Larry Gossett, who I've also known for many years, he is a King County Council member, longtime activist in Seattle, African-American activist who got, did some occupations of buildings back in the early 70s and actually got the Central Area Motivation Program for the black community in Seattle. It's an old fire station that now is used for public services. But he looks like is losing on the county council, the Martin Luther King Jr. County Council. And that's a shock, Jeff, because he has been a very, very progressive voice on the King County Council for decades now. I don't know how many terms, but he's kind of getting close up there with Jim McDermott in terms of the amount of re-elections he's won. So that's a big change, So there's a shakeup. If the results stay as they look like they are now, and Shawna Sawant does not win, we have to remember though that her first election, she was trailing for the first day, and then within 24 hours, Richard Conlon, the incumbent, conceded the race. But it may be that our socialist candidate is no longer on the city council, and our most progressive county council member is no longer on the county council. So, maybe a little bit, a move towards a little bit more of the middle of the road, but not in the way that Amazon would have liked to see on the city council. They definitely have not been able to buy the election. And I'm sure we will hear from Shawna Sawant in the future. My thought was, maybe she'll run for mayor or something, but I haven't heard her say anything like that. But she's a very prominent member of the community and also a very well-known, as I said, socialist around the world because of her outspoken support of immigrants' rights and women's rights and the minimum wage and all these really important issues. So she'll be around. You're not going to, she's not going to disappear from the political scene, although, she is an economics teacher. She has a PhD in economics and may return to Seattle Central College to do some teaching for a while.
Interesting. Well, that's always a good place, someone to take some time away. I would like to see her run for mayor. I would like to see her run for maybe a state house seat in Olympia as well. So hopefully she will, because she's really, her voice is needed in that great city and that state of Washington. Finally, Mark, you got about a minute here. Do you sense that you'll get some idea of some of these other races in the next 2 or 3 days, or is it going to take a week or two? What's the normal scenario?
I'll tell you what, I will do some checking, and I will, if there are some major updates during your show, I will text them to you.
Fantastic.
So that you can see that. But usually it depends. You never can say. We've had some of the closest governor's elections in the history of the country that went on for months.
Greg Law, I guess.
So
remember that.
It could take a week, or in 24 hours we could see a big change. It's hard to say. We don't know how many votes were just in those drop boxes at the last minute last night, but I think there were a lot, because I saw all sorts of people trying to get the vote in at the last minute.
Excellent. All right, Mark Taylor-Canfield, thank you very much for that report. Thank you for doing this on a last-second basis. We're trying to juggle a lot of things here, and you come through once again in the clutch. We will talk to you next Tuesday, sir. All the best, and best of luck to all the progressives out there in Seattle.
Pleasure always, Jeff. You're the best in the business. Talk to you soon.
No. Thank you, man. You helped make me. Thank you. All right. We're going to switch over about 30 seconds, take a quick time out, and then we'll come back with Donna Kelly-Williams. You're tuned in to the Jeff Santos Show.
Improve your reading, writing, and math skills, learn to speak English, earn a high school equivalency credential, or volunteer in an adult education program. Call today. It's the Massachusetts Adult Literacy Hotline. 1-800-447-8844. The line is available 7 days a week, 6 a.m. to midnight. They've got free information on adult secondary education, GED, high-set prep, ESOL, reading, writing, math, and citizenship classes for adults offered throughout Massachusetts. There's also information online at mass.gov/edu/literacy hotline. The Massachusetts Adult Literacy Hotline is a World Education Incorporated project funded by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This message brought to you by your friends here at AM 1530, WVBF.
river. You don't want me no more. You said you don't like my music, says it's cracks and well. I said my song's a baby, then maybe you're the boo. Well, I tried to make you happy, but you just let me down. I tried to do my best for you, but you just left around. I gave you all my money, but you just wanted some more. I said I love you, honey, you just pointed to the door. You sold me down the river. Sold me down the river. You sold me down the river. Baby said you sold me down the river 'cause you don't want my loving anymore. You said you want me to stay home and help with the chores. I said, well, baby, I'm starting to get bored. She took my favorite jacket and she chased my friends away. Now I'm here alone and alone. I guess I'll stay. I said, well, how'd you have to cheat me out of everything I own? You took all my records and you kicked me out of my home. Well, baby, won't you take me back? I'm not so bad. In fact, I bet you, honey, I'm the best you ever had. I may not have a nickel or a fancy degree, but when it comes to loving, hey, you get the best of me. I said, I'll finally let you go now. I think I'm moving on, but I need to get my head straight and accept that you are gone. You sold me down the river 'cause you don't want my loving anymore. I said you sold me down the river. It's a fast road to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me anymore. Oh, well, you sold me down the river 'cause you do not want my loving anymore. Wow. I give you all my money, but you still wanted more. I said I love you, honey. You just wanted to the door. You wanted me to stay home and help you with the chores. And I said, baby, I think I'm getting bored. You took my favorite jacket, then you chased my friends away. And now I'm here all alone and I'm alone. I guess I'll stay. Well, why'd you have to cheat me out of everything I own? You took my record collection and you kicked me out my home. So way down the river. That's right, I said you sold me down. You sold me down the river. I said you sold me down the river 'cause you don't want my loving anymore. Yeah, well, you sold me down the river